At 3:42 a.m., my daughter-in-law called me and said, "Your son drowned in Hawaii. I had him cremated immediately. He left everything to me. You get nothing." I just smiled into the darkness of my bedroom. My son was an excellent swimmer who could hold his breath for 4 minutes. And the truth behind it all left me in shock, not because of the tragedy, but because of the audacity. Before I tell you how I flew 5,000 miles to uncover a murder plot that would make the devil blush, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for the truth when everyone else believed a lie. My name is Augustus Mercer. I am 70 years old, and I have built tunnels under the city of Chicago that will last longer than the Roman Empire. I know structure. I know stress points. And I know when a foundation is rotten. The phone on my nightstand rang with the jarring shrillness that only comes in the dead of night. I did not fumble for it. My hand found the receiver instantly, a reflex honed from years in the Marine Corps. "Augustus, it is Leo." The voice on the other end was hysterical, high-pitched, breathless. It was Valerie, my daughter-in-law. What happened? My voice was gravel, calm. I sat up in bed, swinging my legs out from under the heavy quilt. He is gone. We were night swimming in Maui. He got a cramp, Augustus. He went under so fast. I tried to grab him, but he was too heavy. Oh God, he is gone. She was sobbing, or at least making the sounds of someone sobbing. But I was not listening to the noise, I was listening to the pattern. Gasp, sob, pause, gasp, sob, pause. It was rhythmic. It was rehearsed. I stayed silent. My eyes adjusted to the dark room, fixing on the framed photo of Leo on my dresser. My son, Leo. A man who completed the Ironman in Kona 3 times. A man who swam the English Channel for charity. A man who taught survival swimming to Navy candidates on weekends. And she wanted me to believe he drowned because of a cramp in calm resort waters. I am so sorry, Valerie. Where is he now? I asked. That is the thing. Her voice dropped an octave, shifting from grief to business in a split second. I was so distraught, Augustus. I just wanted him at peace. I had him cremated an hour ago. The local authorities said it was best given the condition of the body. I have his ashes. I froze. My hand gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Cremated. An hour ago. In Hawaii. Without an autopsy for an accidental death. That was not just suspicious, it was impossible. Bureaucracy does not move that fast, even for billionaires, and Valerie was certainly not a billionaire yet. And Augustus, she continued, rushing her words now. He left a new will. He wrote it on the plane. He left the house, the accounts, and the portfolio to me. He said, "You have enough. I just wanted you to know so you do not waste money on lawyers." There it was. The hook, the line, and the sinker. Most fathers would have broken down. They would have screamed. They would have booked the first commercial flight out to hug the grieving widow. But I am not most fathers. I am a man who has negotiated with union bosses and buried secrets in concrete. I understand, Valerie. I said, my voice flat. You did what you thought was right. Really? She sounded surprised. The sobbing stopped completely. Yes. You get some rest. I will handle things on this end. I hung up. The room was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was electric. I did not cry. Grief is a luxury for those who do not have work to do. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, a grid of lights under a heavy rain. My son was not dead from a cramp. My son was murdered. And the woman who killed him just made the mistake of thinking I was a senile old man who would accept a jar of dust as closure. I walked to the mahogany desk in my study and picked up the secure line. I dialed a number I had not used in 6 months. "Mick, wake up. Augustus. It is 4 in the morning." Mick's voice was groggy. "Fuel the Gulf Stream. We are going to Maui. Wheels up in 45 minutes. Is everything okay, boss? Just be ready, Mick, and file a flight plan for low-altitude approach. I do not want to be announced." I hung up and knelt before the wall safe behind my bookshelf. I spun the dial. Right to 24. Left to 10. Right to 75. The heavy steel door swung open with a hiss. Inside were stacks of cash, gold coins, and documents. I ignored the money. I reached for a thick manila envelope at the back. It was labeled Leo Mercer Medical History. I opened it and pulled out an X-ray from 20 years ago. It showed a shattered tibia from a motorcycle accident, and right down the center of the bone was a distinct white line, a titanium rod. I held the X-ray up to the moonlight. Titanium has a melting point of over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A standard cremation oven only reaches 1,800 degrees. If my son was truly in that jar of ashes Valerie claimed to have, there would be a solid metal rod rattling around inside it. If there was no rod, there was no Leo. I placed the X-ray in my leather briefcase. Then I reached back into the safe and pulled out my Colt 1911. It was cold, heavy, and reassuring. I checked the chamber. Loaded. I slid it into the holster inside my jacket. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like a grieving father. I looked like a hunter. I was going to Hawaii, not to mourn a death, but to expose a life of lies. Valerie thought she had won. She thought the distance, the time zones, and the quick cremation would cover her tracks. She thought the game was over before I even knew it had started. But she forgot one thing. She forgot who raised the man she killed. I walked out of my house into the pouring rain. The wind was biting, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was the cold, burning rage in my gut. I climbed into my black SUV and started the engine. The drive to the private airfield would take 30 minutes. I had time to think. I had time to plan. Valerie said I would get nothing. She was wrong. I was going to get the truth, and she was going to get exactly what she deserved. As the wipers slashed back and forth, clearing the rain from my view, I whispered to the empty car. "You made a mistake, Valerie. You should have checked the melting point of titanium." I drove into the night, leaving the city behind. The next time I set foot in Chicago, I would either be a father burying his son properly, or a man visiting his daughter-in-law in a federal prison. There would be no middle ground. The engine roared as I merged onto the highway, speeding toward the runway, where my jet waited like a silver hawk ready to dive. The hunt had begun. The rain in Chicago has a way of washing the city clean, but tonight it just made everything look slick and treacherous. I parked my SUV a block away from Leo's house in Lincoln Park. The wipers slapped back and forth, counting down the seconds, until I crossed a line I could never uncross. The house was dark. A massive brick colonial structure that I had helped Leo inspect before he bought it. It stood silent behind a wrought iron gate. I walked up the driveway, pulling my coat collar up against the wind. I did not ring the doorbell. I punched the 4-digit code into the keypad on the side door. It was Leo's birthday. 1014. A red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again, thinking my cold fingers had slipped. Red light. Valerie had changed the codes. She had locked down the fortress before the body was even cold, or in her case, before the fake ashes were even jarred. I did not panic. I walked around to the back patio. The sliding glass doors were reinforced, double-paned storm glass, secure against burglars, but not against a man who knows how buildings are put together. I took a multi-tool from my pocket and knelt by the frame. I did not break the glass. I simply removed the screws holding the locking mechanism in place from the outside. It took me 3 minutes. A lock is only as good as the frame it is set in, and right now Valerie's frame was crumbling. I slid the door open and stepped into the kitchen. The air inside was stale, but underneath the stillness was a smell that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was not the smell of a house in mourning. There was no scent of old coffee or tears. It smelled of expensive perfume, something floral and heavy, gardenias, Valerie's scent. But there was something else, a musky cologne, sandalwood and arrogance. I moved through the kitchen, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. My boots made no sound on the hardwood floors. I have walked through enemy territory in jungles where a snapped twig meant death. Walking through my son's kitchen was no different. On the marble island in the center of the kitchen sat the first piece of evidence that turned my suspicion into certainty. A bottle of champagne. Dom Perignon. Vintage 2012, it was empty. Beside it were 2 crystal flutes, not one glass for a grieving widow trying to drown her sorrow. 2 glasses. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small pen light, clicking it on. The beam cut through the dark. On the rim of one glass was a smudge of cardinal red lipstick. On the other, nothing. Just fingerprints. I touched the bottle. It was room temperature. They had finished this hours ago, probably right after she made that call to me. While I was staring at the phone trying to process the death of my only child, they were toasting to their success. Rage is a hot fire, but revenge is a cold block of ice. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and looked around. The kitchen was too clean. The counters were wiped down. It looked staged. I walked over to the stainless steel trash compactor. People who lie always forget about the trash. They think once it is in the bin, it ceases to exist. I pulled the drawer open. On top were empty takeout containers from a high-end sushi place. Below that, the foil wrapper from the champagne bottle. I dug deeper, ignoring the indignity of rummaging through garbage. At the bottom, buried under coffee grounds, was a crumpled ball of paper. I smoothed it out on the counter. It was a letter from a private lending firm, the kind that operates out of strip malls and breaks kneecaps if you miss a payment. The header was in bold red letters. Final notice of default. The borrower was Valerie Mercer. The amount due was $842,000. I stared at the number. 800 grand. It was a gambling debt. I knew Valerie liked the casinos in Joliet, but I did not know she was drowning. This was the motive. It was not just greed. It was desperation. She needed Leo's life insurance and the estate to keep from being buried alive by loan sharks. She traded my son's life for a clean slate. I folded the letter and put it in my inside pocket next to my gun. I had the why. Now I needed the who. A floorboard creaked above me. I killed the penlight instantly and stepped into the shadows of the pantry. The silence of the house was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps coming down the main staircase. They were not Valerie's steps. She walked light and fast. These were the heavy, confident strides of a man who felt like he owned the place. The footsteps moved toward the kitchen. The refrigerator door opened, casting a wedge of artificial light across the room. I watched through the crack in the pantry door. A man stood there drinking straight from a carton of orange juice. He was young, maybe 30. Fit. He was wearing nothing but a white towel around his waist. He turned and I saw his face. I recognized him from photos Leo had shown me. This was Gavin, the personal trainer, the surfing instructor, the friend Leo had paid to fly out to Hawaii to help him train for the triathlon. Gavin wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and leaned against the counter right next to the empty champagne bottle. He looked relaxed, victorious. And then I saw it. The detail that made my hand drift toward the holster under my jacket. On his left wrist, glinting in the light of the open fridge, was a watch. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, stainless steel with a blue dial. I had bought that watch for Leo when he completed his first Ironman. It was customized. I did not draw my weapon. A gun is for when you have lost control of the situation. I had not lost control. I stepped out of the pantry. "Nice watch," I said. Gavin jumped so hard he dropped the orange juice. The carton exploded on the floor, splashing sticky yellow liquid over his bare feet. He spun around, eyes wide, wild with panic. He saw an old man in a trench coat standing in the dark, but something in my posture told him I was not just an old man. "Who the hell are you?" Gavin stammered, backing up until his hips hit the granite island. "How did you get in here?" I stepped into the light. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. "I am the man who paid for that watch," I said, walking slowly toward him. "Leo wore it on his right wrist because he was left-handed. You are wearing it on your left. It looks heavy on you, Gavin. It looks like a burden." He looked down at the watch, then back at me. Recognition dawned on his face. "You are the father." "Augustus, take it off," I said. "Now look, old man, you are trespassing. Valerie said you might try something crazy." "I am going to call the cops." He tried to sound tough, puffing out his chest, but I saw his knees shaking. He was a gym rat, not a fighter. "Call them," I challenged, stopping just 2 feet from him. "Tell them you are wearing a dead man's watch in his kitchen, drinking his juice while his wife is supposedly mourning in Hawaii. Tell them about the champagne. Tell them about the $800,000 debt." Gavin's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He realized then that I knew. He realized this was not a social call. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. My grip was iron-forged from years of swinging sledgehammers and pulling rebar. He tried to pull away, but he could not move. "That watch," I whispered, leaning in close enough to smell the fear on him. "It runs on a kinetic movement. It stops if the owner stops moving. If Leo died 4 hours ago, that watch should have stopped. But it is ticking, Gavin. That means you took it off him before he was cold, or maybe before he was even dead." He whimpered. It was a pathetic sound. With his free hand, he frantically undid the clasp. I let go, and the watch clattered onto the marble counter. "Get out," I said. "What?" "Get out of my son's house. If I see you again before the police do, I will not be this polite." Gavin did not need to be told twice. He scrambled backward, slipping on the spilled orange juice, almost falling, before he turned and sprinted toward the back door, leaving the towel flapping. He ran out into the rain half-naked and terrified. I picked up the watch. It was still warm from his skin. I wiped it carefully with my handkerchief and put it in my pocket. As I turned to leave, my eye caught a stack of mail on the hallway table. I flipped through it. Bills, junk mail, and a travel itinerary printed out on thick paper. It was the receipt for the Hawaii trip. I looked at the date of booking. It was dated 2 months ago, but I looked closer at the return flights. Leo had a one-way ticket. Valerie had a round-trip ticket. They had never intended for him to come back. This was not an accident. It was not a heat-of-the-moment crime. It was a calculated execution planned 60 days in advance. I pocketed the itinerary. The puzzle was coming together, and the picture it formed was hideous. I walked out into the rain, leaving the back door open. Let the storm come in. The house was already ruined. I had a plane to catch. The real storm was heading to Hawaii, and its name was Augustus Mercer. The Gulf Stream touched down in Kahului, just as the sun was beginning to bleed through the gray clouds. The humidity hit me the moment the cabin door opened, a thick, wet blanket that smelled of salt and jet fuel. I did not have luggage, just my briefcase and the cold resolve burning in my chest. A black sedan was waiting on the tarmac arranged by Mick while I was in the air. I did not go to the hotel. I did not go to the police station. I went straight to the Maui County morgue. The morgue was a squat beige building near the hospital, surrounded by palm trees that looked too cheerful for a place of death. It was barely 8 in the morning when I walked through the double doors. The air conditioning was humming loudly, trying to battle the tropical heat. Behind the front desk sat a young man with a name tag that read Chemo. He looked bored, scrolling through his phone, sipping an iced coffee. He didn't look up until I tapped my knuckles on the counter, a sharp sound that echoed in the empty lobby. "Help you?" he asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "I am Augustus Mercer. I am here for the records of my son, Leo Mercer. He was brought in early this morning." Chemo blinked, his boredom replaced by a flicker of unease. He set his phone down and typed something into his computer. The keys clacked loudly. He frowned, then typed again. "Mercer." "Right. The drowning victim from the resort." "Look, Mr. Mercer, I am sorry for your loss, but the body has already been released. The next of kin, Mrs. Valerie Mercer, signed all the paperwork. She took him." "I know she took him," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am not here for the body. I am here for the intake report. I want to see the medical examiner's notes. I want to know who declared the time of death and who authorized the release for cremation without an autopsy." Chemo shifted in his seat. He looked at the door behind him as if hoping a supervisor would walk out and save him. "That is confidential, sir. Only the person who signed the release can access those files. You will have to ask Mrs. Mercer." I leaned over the counter. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I just let him see my eyes. The eyes of a man who had stared down union bosses and walked through fire. "Listen to me, son. My son was an athlete. He died in calm water, and 4 hours later he was dust. Now you can hide behind your computer screen and quote policy, or you can tell me what really happened here before I bring a federal investigation down on this little operation." Chemo swallowed hard. He looked around the empty lobby, then lowered his voice. "Look, it was weird, okay? The body came in, but the medical examiner wasn't even called. Some private doctor signed the certificate. Dr. Ellis. I never heard of him before. And then this transport van showed up like 20 minutes later. Not a funeral home hearse. A plain white van. They had the paperwork and my boss said to just let it go." "What was the destination on the transport form?" I asked. Chemo hesitated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. I placed it on the counter. Not as a bribe, but as a promise. He looked at the money, then at me. "Paradise Rest Crematorium," he whispered. "It is out past Paya near the old sugar mill." I left the money on the counter and walked out. Paradise Rest. The name sounded like a cheap motel, not a final resting place. I drove the rental car east, leaving the tourist resorts behind. The road grew narrower, winding through fields of sugarcane that had grown wild and tangled. The GPS led me down a dirt road that kicked up red dust coating the windshield. Paradise Rest was not a crematorium. It was a corrugated metal warehouse with rust eating away at the edges. There was no sign, no manicured lawn, just a smokestack that looked like it hadn't been used in years, cold and lifeless against the sky. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with razor wire. I parked the car and walked to the gate. A padlock held it shut, but the chain was loose enough to squeeze through. I stepped onto the property. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the buzzing of flies. I walked toward the main bay door. It was slightly ajar. "Hey, you can't be in here." A man stepped out from the shadows of the warehouse. He was wearing a greasy mechanic's jumpsuit holding a wrench. He was big with tattoos running up his neck, but his eyes were shifty. "I am looking for the manager," I said, stopping 10 feet from him. "Closed. Private property. Get lost before I call the cops." He hefted the wrench, trying to look menacing. I took a step closer. "You took a delivery this morning. A body. Leo Mercer. I want to know where it is." The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "We don't do bodies here, Pops. This place has been shut down for 6 months. The county pulled our license for emissions violations. We just burn medical waste now. Needles, bandages, whatever the hospitals pay us to disappear. My heart hammered against my ribs. Chemo said the paperwork listed this place. Valerie said she had the ashes. My daughter-in-law has a jar of ashes. She says they are my son. She says he was cremated here this morning. The man spat on the ground. She is lying, or she got ripped off. Look at that stack. He pointed his wrench at the chimney. Does it look like there is heat coming out of there? It takes 3 hours to burn a body. If we had fired up this morning, that brick would still be hot enough to fry an egg. Go ahead. Touch it. I walked past him to the base of the incinerator. I placed my hand on the brickwork. Cold. Stone cold. So where did the van go? I asked, turning back to him. The white van that picked up the body. He shrugged, his bravado fading as he realized I wasn't buying his tough guy act. I don't know about no van, but sometimes people pay to use the address on the paperwork, just for the stamp, you know, to make it look legal. If they came here, they didn't unload anything. They just turned around and drove back toward the cliffs, the North Shore, where the water is deep and the currents are strong. I looked at the man. He was scum, a part of a system that let monsters like Valerie operate in the dark, but he was useful. If anyone asks, you never saw me, I said. He nodded quickly, happy to see me go. I walked back to the car, my boots kicking up the red dust. The realization settled over me, heavy and suffocating. My son was not in a jar. He was not resting in peace. His body, the body I had held when he was a baby, the body that had grown strong and capable, was being treated like garbage. Valerie hadn't just killed him. She had erased him. She had used a fake doctor, a fake crematorium, and a fake story to make him vanish so she could cash a check. But she made a mistake. She left a trail of people who could be bought or scared, and she left a father who had nothing left to lose. I got back into the car and gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. I didn't feel grief anymore. That emotion was gone, burned away by the cold fury of the truth. I knew what I had to do next. I had to find where the white van went. I had to find the water. And I had to pray that the ocean hadn't taken him too far away, because I needed him back. I needed him to testify. I started the engine and turned the car around. The hunt was moving from the land to the sea, and God help anyone who stood in my way. I parked the rental car on a ridge overlooking Ka'anapali Beach, where the resorts spilled out onto the golden sand like concrete jewels. The sun was high now, burning through the haze, and the beach was crowded with tourists, but I was looking for only one person. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars, a pair of Steiner military-grade optics I had kept from my service days. They cut through the distance, bringing the scene below into sharp clarity. There she was, Valerie. She was standing near the water's edge, dressed in a flowing white dress that caught the wind. It was a performance piece perfectly staged for sympathy. A small crowd had gathered around her, mostly hotel guests, and staff drawn by the spectacle of a beautiful, grieving widow. She held a phone in front of her face on a tripod, broadcasting her sorrow to the world. Through the lenses, I could see the tears streaming down her face. They looked real. She was talking to the camera, her hand resting on her chest in a gesture of heartbreak. I could not hear her from up here, but I didn't need to. I had a directional microphone aimed at her, plugged into a digital recorder on the passenger seat. I slipped the headphones on. The wind noise was filtered out, leaving only her voice clear and trembling. I just want to say thank you to everyone for your prayers. Leo loved this ocean. He loved the freedom of it. And now he is part of it forever. I am devastated, but I know he is at peace. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. She wiped a tear and leaned forward to end the stream. The crowd murmured in sympathy. A woman in a swimsuit hugged her. Valerie nodded, accepting the comfort, looking for all the world, like a woman whose life had been shattered. But I watched her eyes. They were dry the moment the camera light went off. They scanned the crowd not with grief, but with calculation, checking to see if the performance had landed. The crowd began to disperse, leaving her alone on the sand. Or so they thought. From the shadow of a palm tree, a man stepped out. Gavin. He was wearing sunglasses and board shorts, looking every bit the concerned friend. He walked over to her and handed her a bottle of water. I zoomed in. The microphone picked up the shift in their tone instantly. The trembling grief was gone, replaced by a sharp, conspiratorial whisper. "Did you see the viewer count?" Valerie asked, taking a sip of water. 12,000 live. The donation link is already up to $5,000. Gavin laughed, kicking at the sand. Peanuts compared to what is coming, babe. Did the old man call back? Not since this morning. He is probably sitting in his big empty house staring at a wall. He is in shock. He won't make a move until we are back in Chicago, and by then the will is probated. I watched them. They stood there under the Hawaiian sun, discussing my son's murder like it was a business merger. Gavin put his hand on her waist, a gesture far too intimate for a friend comforting a widow. He pulled her close and she didn't pull away. She leaned into him. "He is going to fight it, Val. He is not stupid." Gavin said, his voice dropping lower. "Let him fight." Valerie sneered. "He is 70 years old. His heart is weak. The stress will kill him before the court date. Laugia da sechet somtoi, ki bit min matang. That old man will be dead soon when he realizes he has lost everything." My hand tightened on the steering wheel. Hearing it was different than suspecting it. They were banking on my death. They were counting on my grief to be the weapon that finished what they started. I pressed the save button on the recorder. This was not just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of conspiracy. They turned and began walking back toward the hotel, their bodies relaxed, their steps light. They thought they had won. They thought the only witness to their crime was the ocean. I set the binoculars down and started the car engine, ready to follow them back to the hotel to see which room they were sharing. But before I could shift into gear, a shadow fell across my windshield. A man was standing by the driver's side door. He was big, shirtless, with tribal tattoos covering his chest and arms. He looked like the kind of muscle you hire when you want someone hurt, but don't want to do it yourself. He tapped on the glass with a heavy silver ring. I rolled the window down 2 inches. "Can I help you?" "You need to move along, Pops." "Private road." The man said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a public overlook," I replied calmly. "Not today. You have been sitting here too long watching things that ain't your business. My friend down there doesn't like being watched." He nodded toward the beach where Gavin had stopped and was looking up at the ridge. He had spotted the glint of my binoculars. He had sent his guard dog. I opened the door. The big man stepped back, surprised. He expected me to drive away, scared. He didn't expect a 70-year-old man to step out to meet him. "I am leaving," I said, standing to my full height. "I just wanted to enjoy the view." "You saw enough. Give me the camera." He reached for the binoculars on the seat. I caught his wrist. It was a reflex, fast and hard. He looked down at my hand, shocked by the grip strength. I didn't give him time to recover. I twisted his wrist outward, locking the joint, and stepped in, driving my elbow into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs in a rush. He doubled over, gasping. I didn't stop. I brought my knee up into his face, not hard enough to break bone, but hard enough to put him on the ground. He collapsed in the red dust, groaning, holding his nose. I knelt beside him. He wasn't a killer. He was just a local thug paid to intimidate. I reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was unlocked. The last message on the screen was from a contact named Surfer Boy. Check out the guy in the black sedan on the ridge. Make him leave. Take his memory card. I looked down at the groaning man. Tell your friend Gavin that the old man says hello. And tell him I am not leaving until I get what is mine. I stood up and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat next to the recorder. I got back in the car and reversed out of the overlook, leaving the thug writhing in the dust. My heart rate hadn't even gone up. I checked the rearview mirror. Gavin was still standing on the beach looking up, but now he wasn't relaxed. He was stiff. He knew something had gone wrong. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. And I needed them sloppy. I needed them to make one more mistake. I turned the car onto the main highway heading back toward the town. The performance on the beach was over. The real show was just beginning. I beat them back to Chicago by 6 hours. The Gulf Stream cuts through the air faster than a commercial airliner. And while Valerie and Gavin were likely sipping cocktails in first class celebrating their victory, I was already landing on the private strip in Waukegan. The city looked different to me now. It was no longer just my home. It was the battlefield where the final act of this tragedy would play out. I did not go to my house. I went straight to the Loop to the office of Harrow and Associates. Nathaniel Harrow has been my lawyer for 30 years. He is a man who does not believe in emails or cloud storage. He keeps his secrets in fireproof filing cabinets, and his office smells of old leather and expensive scotch. When I walked in, he did not ask why I was back so soon. He took one look at my face and told his secretary to hold all calls. I sat down in the wingback chair opposite his massive mahogany desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him everything. The fake cremation, the empty house, the debt, the conversation on the beach. Harrow listened without blinking. He is a man who has seen the worst of human nature, but even he looked disturbed. When I finished, he leaned back and steeped his fingers. So she has a will, he said, his voice dry and precise. She claims Leo wrote it on the plane. She does, I confirmed. She says it leaves everything to her. Harrow let out a short, humorless laugh. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a key. He stood up and walked to the safe in the corner of the room. The mechanism clicked loudly in the silence. He pulled out a thick blue binder. Leo was a smart man, Augustus Harrow said, placing the binder on the desk. He listened to you. When he married Valerie, he wanted to believe it was forever, but you told him that love is blind, but marriage is a contract. He signed the ironclad trust 3 years ago, right after he found out about her first affair. I remembered that day. Leo had come to me broken-hearted. Valerie had cheated on him with a photographer. She begged for forgiveness, and he gave it to her, but I made sure he put on armor first. Open it, Harrow said. I opened the binder. The document was dense, full of legal jargon, but the core of it was simple. The ironclad trust was designed to bypass probate court entirely. It placed every asset Leo owned, his house, his investment portfolio, his collection of vintage motorcycles, into a trust managed by a third party. Harrow pointed to paragraph 4. In the event of Leo's death, the beneficiary is Valerie Mercer, provided she is still his wife and there is no pending divorce litigation. However, look at the addendum. I flipped to the back page. The addendum was titled The Suspicious Circumstance Clause. It states that if Leo dies in a manner deemed accidental without a police investigation or autopsy, the distribution of assets is frozen for a period of 12 months, Harrow explained. During that time, the trustee has the power to launch an independent investigation. And guess who the trustee is? I looked at the signature line. It was my name. Augustus Mercer. She does not know about this, I said. She knows it exists, Harrow corrected, but she does not know the details. Leo kept the paperwork here. But look at this. Harrow turned his computer monitor toward me. It showed the access logs for the online portal of the trust fund. It was a read-only account that Leo used to check his balances. The screen was a wall of red text. Failed login attempt. Look at the dates, Harrow said, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. I leaned in. The first attempt was 6 days ago. That was 2 days before they flew to Hawaii. The second attempt was 4 days ago. And then there was a flurry of attempts yesterday morning, right around the time she called me to say he was dead. She was trying to get in, I whispered. She was fishing for the password, Harrow said. She tried his birthday. She tried her birthday. She tried their anniversary. She tried 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She was desperate to see how much money was in there, and more importantly, she wanted to see if she could transfer it. She failed every time. This proves premeditation. I said, feeling the cold anger settle in my chest again. She was trying to access his money before she killed him. She needed to know if she could get to the cash immediately to pay off her sharks. Exactly, Harrow said, closing the folder. We have her, Augustus. We can file a motion tomorrow. We can freeze her out. We can present this log to the police as evidence of financial motive. We can stop her from getting a single dime. I sat back in the chair and looked at the Chicago skyline through the window. The rain had started again, blurring the lights of the skyscrapers. It would be easy to stop her now. It would be easy to crush her with paper and ink. But that was not enough. No, I said. Harrow looked at me surprised. No. If we stop her now, she walks away with nothing. But she walks away free, I said, my voice low. The police in Hawaii are lazy. Without a body, they will treat this as a he said, she said case. They will say the login attempts are just a wife worrying about finances. She will claim the will is real and we are just mean-spirited. She might lose the money, but she will live her life. She will go find another victim. What are you suggesting? Augustus Harrow asked, watching me closely. I want to destroy her completely, I said. I want to take away her freedom. I want her to rot in a cell until she is old and gray. And how do you propose we do that? We let her file the will, I said. Harrow's eyes widened. You want her to commit fraud? I want her to commit perjury, I corrected. If she files that fake will in probate court, she is swearing under oath that it is genuine. She is swearing that she is the rightful heir. Once she stands before a judge and lies on the record, it is no longer a civil dispute. It is a felony. It is fraud upon the court. And when we reveal the truth, she won't just lose the lawsuit. She will go to federal prison. It is a risk, Harrow warned. If the judge believes her fake witnesses, the judge won't believe her, I interrupted. Because I am going to play the part she wrote for me. I am going to be the defeated old man. I am going to let her think she has won. I want her to get comfortable. I want her to spend money she does not have yet. I want her to be so arrogant that she walks into that courtroom without a care in the world. Harrow looked at me for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. He closed the binder and locked it back in the safe. You are a dangerous man, Augustus, he said. I stood up and buttoned my coat. They killed my son for a payout, Harrow. I am going to make sure the price they pay is everything they have. We spent the next hour drafting the response. We would send a letter to her lawyer acknowledging the existence of the new will, but asking for a formal reading in court. We would not mention the trust. We would not mention the trust's addendum. We would give her enough rope to hang herself and Gavin. When I left Harrow's office, the city was dark. I felt a strange sense of calm. The trap was set. The cheese was in place. Now all I had to do was wait for the rat to come home. I drove back to my house. The silence was heavy, but I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the dark in the living room, holding the watch I had taken from Gavin. I wound it slowly, feeling the gears click. Time was ticking for Valerie. She thought she was flying back to a fortune. She was flying back to a cage. I checked my phone. There was a text from the private investigator I had hired to watch the airport. Targets landed. They are taking a limo to the Lincoln Park house. A limo, of course. Spending money they didn't have yet. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I needed to be rested. Tomorrow the grieving widow would come knocking, and I had to be ready to give the performance of a lifetime. I had to look weak. I had to look broken. I had to smile through the pain just like she did. But behind my smile I would be counting down the days until the gavel fell. The legal fortress was built. The gates were open, and Valerie was about to march right in. The black limousine pulled up to the wrought iron gates of my son's house at exactly 2 in the afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and dark like an oil spill. I watched from my car parked down the street as the spectacle began. Valerie did not just come home, she arrived. She stepped out of the car wearing a black dress that was modest enough for a widow, but tight enough to remind everyone that she was still young and beautiful. She wore large, dark sunglasses that covered half her face, a shield against the world, or perhaps a way to hide the lack of red rims around her eyes. She was not alone. Gavin was right there beside her, holding her elbow, guiding her as if she were made of fragile glass. To the neighbors peering through their blinds and the relatives gathering on the front lawn, it looked like a supportive friend helping a devastated woman. To me, it looked like an accomplice making sure his investment did not stumble. They walked up the driveway, and the performance escalated. Valerie paused halfway to the door. She put a hand to her chest, let out a visible gasp that shook her shoulders, and then collapsed. It was a graceful fall. She did not hit the concrete hard. She wilted like a flower deprived of water, sinking into Gavin's waiting arms. The crowd on the lawn gasped. A cousin rushed forward. Gavin scooped her up, his face a mask of concern, and carried her into the house. It was theater, pure and simple. I checked my watch. It was time for my entrance. I did not straighten my tie. Instead, I loosened it. I did not smooth my hair. I ruffled it slightly. I took a deep breath and let the air out slowly, letting my posture collapse. I rounded my shoulders. I let my hands shake. I had to become exactly what they expected. A broken old man. A father who had lost his only child and his will to fight. I walked up the driveway, leaning heavily on the cane I had dug out of the back of my closet. I walked past the whispering relatives. They parted for me, their eyes full of pity. I heard snippets of their conversation. Poor Augustus. He looks terrible. He has aged 10 years in a day. Good. That was exactly what I wanted them to see. I wanted them to see a ruin, so they would not look for the bomb ticking inside the foundation. Inside the house, the air was thick with the scent of lilies. I hate lilies. They smell like funerals. They smell like death masked by perfume. The living room was full of people murmuring in hushed tones, holding plates of food they would not eat. In the center of the room, on the plush velvet sofa, lay Valerie. She was propped up by pillows, holding a glass of water, her hand trembling just enough to ripple the surface. Gavin stood behind the sofa, a sentinel guarding the queen. When I stepped into the room, the conversation died. Silence rippled outward from the door until the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Valerie looked up. Through her dark glasses, she studied me. She was looking for anger. She was looking for the man who had threatened her on the phone. But I gave her nothing but defeat. Augustus. She whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. I shuffled forward, my cane tapping a slow rhythm on the hardwood. I stopped 5 feet from her. I looked at the floor, then I looked at her. I am sorry I was not at the airport, Valerie. I said, my voice raspy and weak. I could not bring myself to go. It is too much. Valerie relaxed. I saw the tension leave her shoulders. She set the water glass down and reached out a hand. I know, Augustus. It is too much for all of us. I did everything I could. I promise. I took her hand. It was cold. Her skin felt dry like paper. I suppressed the urge to crush her fingers in my grip. I suppressed the urge to scream that I knew about the debts and the boyfriend and the fake cremation. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently, the way a grieving father would comfort the woman his son loved. "I know you did," I said. "I was angry before, on the phone. I was in shock. But now I just want peace. I do not want to fight Valerie. I do not care about the house. I do not care about the money. You can have the lawyers handle all of that." She squeezed back. A spark of triumph ignited behind her sunglasses. She looked up at Gavin and gave a barely perceptible nod. They had won. The old lion had no teeth left. "Thank you, Augustus," she said. "That means so much to me. Leo would want us to be family, not enemies." I nodded, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "There is just one thing I want, Valerie. One thing, and then I will go. I cannot stay in this house. It has too many memories. Anything, Augustus." "What do you need?" I looked toward the fireplace mantel. Sitting there, surrounded by white candles, was a brass urn. It was simple, polished, and completely generic. It was the kind of urn you buy online for $50 with overnight shipping. "I want him," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the urn. "I want to take him home. I want to put him next to his mother. You have the house, you have his life here. Please let me have this." Valerie hesitated for a fraction of a second. She looked at the urn, then back at me. She was calculating. To her, that urn was just a prop. It was a jar of dirt and wood ash she had bought from a criminal in Hawaii. It meant nothing to her. But giving it to me meant getting me out of the house. It meant securing the assets without a fight. It was a cheap price to pay for $5 million. "Of course," she said, sitting up. She reached over and picked up the urn. She held it for a moment, looking at it with a reverence that made my stomach turn. Then she held it out to me. "Take him. He belongs with you." Yes, I took the urn. It was heavy. Heavier than it should be. They had probably filled it with sand or gravel to mimic the weight of human remains. I cradled it in my arm, pulling it close to my chest. I bowed my head. "Thank you," I whispered. I turned to leave. Gavin stepped forward, trying to play the good host. "Can I get you a drink, Augustus? Some water? A scotch, maybe?" "No," I said, not looking at him. "I just want to go home." I walked back through the crowd, clutching the brass jar. People reached out to touch my shoulder, to murmur condolences. I ignored them all. I was focused on the weight in my arms. I was focused on the door. I walked out into the gray afternoon, leaving the scent of lilies and lies behind me. I walked down the driveway, my cane tapping faster now, my steps becoming surer. When I reached my car, I opened the passenger door and placed the urn on the seat. I strapped it in with the seatbelt. I closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. I stood there for a moment, looking back at the house. I could see Valerie and Gavin in the window watching me leave. They were probably toasting again. They were probably laughing at how easy it was to manipulate a grieving old man. I got in the car and started the engine. The powerful rumble of the motor was the only sound in the enclosed space. I looked at the urn beside me. The brass reflected the streetlights that were just starting to flicker on. I reached over and placed my hand on the cold metal lid. My hand was steady now. The tremor was gone. The act was over. "I know you are not in there, son," I said, my voice low and dangerous in the quiet car. I tapped the lid with my ring finger. It made a hollow sound, a sound of emptiness. "I know this is just dirt and sand, but it is going to be the dirt that buries them, Leo. This jar is not your resting place. It is their prison sentence." I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. I was not going home. I was going to the private lab I had hired, a lab where a forensic geologist and a pathologist were waiting for me. They would analyze every grain of dust in that jar. They would prove scientifically what I already knew in my gut, that there was no bone in there, no human DNA, and definitely no titanium. Valerie thought she had handed me closure. Instead, she had handed me the smoking gun. She had given me the physical evidence of fraud and the desecration of a corpse. She had signed her confession when she handed me that jar. I drove through the darkening streets of Chicago. The city lights blurred past me. I felt a grim satisfaction. The widow had returned, and she had played her part perfectly. Now it was my turn to rewrite the ending. The play wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a revenge thriller. And I was the director. Dr. Thorne's private laboratory was located in an unassuming industrial park in the West Loop, disguised as a geological survey firm. I walked in carrying the brass urn like it was a nuclear football. Thorne was a man I had known since my days contracting for the city. He was a forensic geologist who could tell you where a murder victim had been walking just by the mud on their shoes. He did not ask questions. He knew that when I called him at night, it was not for a social visit. The lab was sterile and white, humming with the quiet vibration of expensive machinery. It smelled of ozone and rubbing alcohol. Thorne put on a pair of blue latex gloves and gestured for me to place the urn on the stainless steel examination table. The metal clinked against the surface, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. "I need a full compositional analysis, Eris," I said. "I need to know exactly what is in that jar, and I need to know if there are any traces of titanium alloy grade 5. Thorne nodded. He reached for the lid. I watched his hands steady and precise. My own hands were clenched in my pockets. This was the moment of truth. If there were human remains in there, if there was even a fragment of Leo, I would have to apologize to the universe. But my gut told me the universe owed me nothing. He unscrewed the lid. It made a grinding sound. He tilted the urn and poured the contents onto a sterile tray. A pile of gray and black ash spilled out, accompanied by small chunks of white bone. To the untrained eye, it looked like the remains of a loved one. But I was not looking with untrained eyes. I was looking for the glint of metal. I was looking for the rod that had held my son's leg together for 20 years. There was nothing, just gray dust and white fragments. Thorne spread the ash with a pair of tweezers. He picked up a larger chunk of bone and held it under the magnifying lamp. He frowned. He didn't say a word. He just took a sample of the ash and placed it into a mass spectrometer. Then he took the bone fragment and walked over to a high-powered microscope. The waiting was the hardest part. The machines whirred and beeped, processing the samples. I paced the length of the room. I thought about Leo. I thought about the time he broke his leg. I remembered the surgery, the pain, and the rehab. That titanium rod was a part of him. It was a part of his history. It could not just vanish. Physics does not work that way. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. Finally, the printer chugged to life, spitting out a graph with jagged lines. Thorne pulled the paper out and studied it. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He turned to look at me, and his expression was grim. "It is not him, Gus." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The relief was instantly replaced by a surge of cold fury. "Tell me," I said. Thorne tapped the paper. "The ash is 90% organic cellulose, specifically Quercus robur, oak wood. It is basically fireplace ash, Gus. High carbon content consistent with burning hardwood, not human tissue. And the bone?" I asked, pointing to the white fragments on the tray. Thorne picked up the piece with his tweezers. "It is dense, too dense for human cancellous bone. The structure is bovine. This is a piece of a cow's femur, probably bought from a butcher shop or a rendering plant and hammered into pieces to look like cremation remains." I stared at the pile of dust, oak wood and cow bone. That was what Valerie had handed me. That was what she had cried over. She had handed me the remains of a barbecue and told me it was my son. The disrespect was so profound, it made my vision blur. She hadn't just killed him, she had mocked his existence. So there is no body in there, I said, confirming what I already knew. None. And definitely no titanium. If there had been a rod in the cremation chamber, it would be here. It would be scorched but intact. This jar is a prop, Gus. A cheap lie. I nodded. I did not need to hear any more. I had the scientific proof. The death certificate was a lie. The cremation was a lie. The will was a lie. But proving fraud was not enough. I needed to prove murder. Just as Thorne was sealing the samples into evidence bags for me, my satellite phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. It was the secure line I had given to the dive team in Hawaii. I stepped into the hallway and answered. It was Kai, the lead diver. Mr. Mercer. Kai's voice was crackly, coming from 5,000 miles away. We found something. Did you find him? I asked, my voice tight. Not yet. The currents are strong near the drop-off. But we found his gear. We found a flipper wedged in the coral about 40 feet down near the Black Rock Point. A flipper can come loose, Kai. That doesn't prove anything. I know, sir. But you need to see the photo I just sent you. We brought it up. It didn't fall off. I pulled the phone away from my ear and opened the encrypted message. The image loaded slowly. It showed a bright yellow swim fin lying on the deck of a boat. It was Leo's brand. But I zoomed in on the heel strap. The rubber strap wasn't torn. It wasn't frayed from wear and tear. It was cut. The line was clean and straight, a razor-sharp slice right through the thickest part of the rubber. I put the phone back to my ear. It was cut, I said. Yes, sir, Kai confirmed. And we found the other one 50 yards away. Same thing. Both straps slashed. Someone made sure that even if he was conscious, he wouldn't be able to kick against the current. Without fins in that water. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Leo was a strong swimmer, but without fins in a riptide after being drugged, he wouldn't have stood a chance. They had disabled him. They had stripped him of his ability to survive. Keep looking, Kai, I said. You have to find him. I have proof that the ashes are fake. I have proof that his gear was sabotaged. But without the body, they will claim he faked his own death, or that he is just missing. I need him. Do not stop until you find him. I hung up. I stood in the sterile white hallway of the lab, holding the phone in one hand and the bag of fake ashes in the other. I had the puzzle pieces now. Valerie and Gavin had drugged him. They had taken him out on the water. They had cut his fins to ensure he couldn't swim back if he woke up. Then they had dumped him and replaced him with a jar of wood ash. It was a perfect crime on paper. But they had forgotten the variable of a father's rage. They had forgotten that I knew every inch of my son's body, including the metal inside it. I walked back into the lab. Thorne looked at me. What now, Gus? He asked. Now we wait for the ocean to give him back, I said. And while we wait, I am going to let Valerie think she has won. I am going to let her sleep soundly in my son's house. Because when they find him, her nightmare is going to begin, and I want her to be wide awake for every second of it. I took the evidence bag and walked out into the Chicago night. The city was asleep, but I was not. The clock was ticking and the tide was turning. My son was out there somewhere in the dark water, and I was going to bring him home no matter what. I sat in my study surrounded by nautical charts and bathymetric maps of the Hawaiian Islands. The blue glow of 3 monitors illuminated the room, casting long shadows against the bookshelves. On the main screen was a live feed of the Doppler radar for the Pacific. On the second screen was a topographic layout of the Maui coastline, specifically the treacherous stretch of cliffs near the old sugar mill. And on the third screen was a black void, the live video feed from Kai's dive boat. I was 5,000 miles away, but my mind was in that water. I pressed the talk button on my satellite radio. The connection hissed with static. "Kai, listen to me," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You are looking in the wrong place. You are searching the impact zone where the cliffs meet the water. But you are assuming he sank straight down." There is a silence on the line, then Kai's voice came through, breathless and distorted by the wind on his end. "Sir, the current is ripping right here. If we go out any further, we lose the protection of the bay." I traced a finger along the contour lines of the map on my desk. I recalled my time stationed in the Pacific years ago. I knew these waters. I knew how they moved. "The tide was going out when they dumped him," I explained. "The North Pacific Current hits that shelf and splits. It creates a downdraft that pulls heavy objects into the underwater canyons. If they weighted him down, he didn't just sink. He rolled. He would have rolled down the slope until he hit the shelf at 30 meters. I grabbed a pencil and drew a calculated line on the map. "Shift your search grid 200 yards north-northwest," I ordered. "Look for a volcanic fissure. It looks like a scar on the ocean floor. The locals call it the Devil's Throat. If he is down there, that is where the ocean would have trapped him." "Mr. Mercer, that is deep," Kai said, hesitation creeping into his voice. "That is pushing the limit for recreational gear. We need mixed gas for that kind of bottom time if we want to be thorough." "I am not asking you to be thorough, Kai. I am asking you to be precise. Do you have the tanks? We have them, but then use them." I cut him off. "I am wiring another $50,000 to your account right now. This is not a request. This is a salvage operation." I waited. The static hissed. Then I heard the sound of orders being shouted on the deck of the boat. Engines revved. They were moving. I leaned back in my leather chair, rubbing my eyes. I had not slept in 36 hours. My body was aching, but my mind was sharp. I was applying the same logic I used for building tunnels. You follow the path of least resistance. Gravity and water are predictable forces. Murderers are messy, but nature is precise. If Valerie and Gavin had thrown him over with weights, the laws of physics dictated exactly where he had to be. But there was a variable I could not control. On the radar screen, a massive swirling mass of red and orange was spinning toward the islands. A tropical depression had upgraded to a storm overnight. They were calling it Storm Isel. It was moving fast, churning up the ocean, turning the seabed into a blender of sand and rock. Kai's voice crackled back over the radio. "Mr. Mercer, the swell is picking up. We have 6-foot waves out here. Visibility is dropping to 0. The Coast Guard is issuing a small craft advisory. We have maybe 2 hours before this turns into a blender." "2 hours is all we have," I said, gripping the edge of my desk. "If that storm hits and he is not secured, the surge will wash him into the deep channel. If he goes over the drop-off into the abyss, we will never get him back. The pressure down there will crush him, and the evidence will be lost forever." I watched the radar. The storm was a monster eating up the miles. It was a race between the truth and the chaos of the ocean. "Kai, send them down," I said. "Now." I watched the black screen. Suddenly it flickered to life. One of the divers had turned on his helmet camera. I saw the chaotic surface of the water bubbles and foam as he splashed in. Then the camera dipped below the surface and the world went silent and blue. The sound of the diver's breathing was heavy and rhythmic. Hiss, click, hiss, click. I watched as he descended. The water was murky, filled with sediment kicked up by the approaching storm. It was like swimming through fog. "Depth 40 feet. The diver reported. "Current is strong. It is pushing me sideways." Fight it, I whispered to the screen. Depth 60 feet. I see the bottom. It is rock and coral. Nothing here. Keep moving north, I instructed. Find the fissure. The camera panned over the desolate landscape of the ocean floor. Dead coral. Volcanic rock. Abandoned fishing nets. It was a graveyard of things the land had rejected. Depth 80 feet. Approaching the drop-off. I held my breath. The storm was hammering the surface now. I could see the camera shaking as the surge pulled the diver back and forth even at this depth. There! The diver shouted. I see the fissure. On the screen, a dark, jagged crack appeared in the sea floor. It looked like a wound in the earth. Go inside, I said. The diver swam closer, fighting the drag. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the walls of the canyon. I see something, he said. My heart stopped. At the bottom of the fissure, wedged tight between two boulders, was a shape. It was not a rock. It was not a piece of coral. It was a large canvas sack. Heavy duty, the kind used for construction debris. It was wrapped in heavy steel chains secured with padlocks. The diver reached out. His gloved hand touched the canvas. It didn't give. It was packed solid. I am at 95 feet. I found a package. It is wrapped in chain. It is heavy. Cut the bag. I ordered, my voice barely a whisper. I need to know. The diver pulled a knife from his leg sheath. He sawed at the thick canvas. A cloud of bubbles obscured the view for a moment. Then the fabric tore open. The flashlight beam hit the contents. I saw a hand, pale, white, cold, and on the ring finger a gold wedding band that I had given him on his wedding day. I closed my eyes. A tear leaked out hot and stinging. It was him, my son, my boy, stuffed in a sack like garbage, weighted down with chains, thrown off a cliff by the woman he loved and the man he called a friend. Mr. Mercer. The diver's voice was somber. We have him. Secure him, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. Do not try to bring him up yet. The surge is too strong. If you try to lift that weight now, you will get the bends or snap the line. Secure him to the rock. Mark the GPS. We will come back for him when the storm passes. Just don't let the ocean take him. Copy that, sir. We are securing the target. I watched as they wrapped a high-tensile line around the chains anchoring my son to the earth. They were not leaving him. They were claiming him. I turned off the radio. The silence in the study was deafening. The storm on the screen was raging, but the storm inside me had turned into something else. It had turned into a cold, hard resolve. I had the body. I had the murder weapon. I had the motive. And I had the ashes of a cow in a jar. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the federal prosecutor in Honolulu. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to bring the hammer down. Valerie and Gavin were sleeping soundly in Chicago, dreaming of their millions. They didn't know that the ocean had just given up its dead. They didn't know that the ghost of Leo Mercer was coming for them, and he was bringing hell with him. The Cook County Probate Court is a theater where the scripts are written in legalese, and the actors wear three-piece suits. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded on the polished oak surface. To my right sat Nathaniel Harrow, my attorney, who looked as comfortable in this environment as a shark in open water. To my left, the empty chair where my son should have been. Across the aisle sat Valerie. She had perfected the role of the grieving widow. She wore a modest black dress that was high at the neck and long at the hem. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she held a lace handkerchief which she dabbed at her dry eyes every time the judge looked her way. Behind the rail in the gallery, Gavin sat with his head bowed, trying to look supportive and somber. He had traded his board shorts for a charcoal suit that fit him poorly. He looked nervous, but Valerie looked radiant in her sorrow. She radiated confidence. She believed she had already won. She believed that the document sitting on the judge's bench was her golden ticket to a life of luxury. It was the so-called last will and testament of Leo Mercer, handwritten on airline stationery, and witnessed by a flight attendant who I suspected was now enjoying a very expensive vacation in the Caribbean. Judge Pendergast entered the room, a man with a face like a crumpled map and eyes that had seen too many family squabbles. He took his seat and peered over his spectacles. The air in the room was stale, recycling the tension of 1,000 broken families that had come before us. The proceedings began with Valerie's lawyer, a man named Sterling, who had a reputation for being loud and expensive. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, pacing before the bench. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice booming, "we are here today to execute the final wishes of a man who died tragically young. Leo Mercer was a man who loved his wife deeply. A man who wanted to ensure that the woman who stood by his side was taken care of. The document before you is clear. It is concise. It leaves everything, including the property in Lincoln Park and the investment accounts, to Mrs. Valerie Mercer." Sterling paused for effect, turning to look at me with a sneer. "However, we are facing opposition. Opposition not from a creditor or a partner, but from a father. A father who cannot accept that his son was a grown man, capable of making his own decisions. A father who frankly has enough wealth of his own and yet seeks to strip a widow of her inheritance out of spite." I did not move. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the grain of the wood on the table. This was the narrative they had constructed. Augustus, the tyrant. Augustus, the greedy old man. Sterling called his first witness. It was a woman named Sarah, a supposed friend of the family. I had never seen her before in my life. She took the stand and swore to tell the truth. Leo was so happy with Valerie, she told the court, her voice trembling. He told me just weeks before the trip that he was worried about his dad. He said Augustus was controlling. He said he wanted to make sure Valerie was safe if anything happened to him, because he knew his father would try to cut her off. It was a lie so bold that I felt Harrow tense up beside me. He started to rise to object, but I placed a hand on his forearm. I shook my head slightly. Let them talk. Let them build their tower of lies as high as they wanted. The higher they built it, the harder it would fall. Sterling smiled, seeing that we were not fighting back. He turned his attention to me. He began to paint a picture of our relationship that was unrecognizable. He described me as cold and distant. He claimed I had forced Leo into the family business. He claimed I had never approved of Valerie because she came from a humble background. "Your Honor," Sterling thundered, pointing a finger at me. "This man is not grieving. Look at him. He has not shed a tear. He flew to Hawaii, and instead of comforting his daughter-in-law, he harassed her. He demanded paperwork. He broke into her home. He is using this court to abuse the woman his son loved." Judge Pendergast looked at me. His expression was stern. He saw a stone-faced old man who refused to show emotion. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see. He did not know that the reason I did not cry was because I had already cried an ocean inside my heart. He did not know that the reason I was silent was because I was waiting for the trap to snap shut. Then came the moment we had been waiting for. Sterling called Valerie to the stand. She walked up to the witness box, moving with the slow hesitation of the heartbroken. She took the oath. Her hand did not shake on the Bible. She sat down and looked at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. Mrs. Mercer, Sterling asked, his voice soft now. "Can you tell the court about the last moments you spent with your husband?" Valerie took a deep breath. She pressed the handkerchief to her nose. "We were happy," she whispered. "We were in Maui. It was paradise. We went for a night swim. The water was so warm." Leo was laughing, and then he just stopped. He shouted that his leg was cramping. I tried to reach him. I really tried. But the current was too strong. He just slipped away. The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter paused. It was a compelling performance. And after the tragedy, Sterling continued gently. You made arrangements. Yes, Valerie said. I was alone. I was terrified. I just wanted to bring him home. I had him cremated because I wanted to keep him close to me. I have his ashes. They are the only thing I have left of him. Sterling nodded, solemnity etched on his face. And this will. Did you see him write it? I did, Valerie said, looking directly at me. He wrote it on the plane. He said he had a bad feeling. He said he wanted to make sure I was safe from him. She pointed at me again. Sterling turned to the judge. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The will is valid. The witness testimony supports the deceased's intent. We ask that you grant immediate probate to Mrs. Mercer and dismiss the frivolous contest from Mr. Mercer. Judge Pendergast leaned back in his chair. He looked at Harrow. Does the defense have anything to say, he asked. Or should I issue my ruling now? It seems to me that this is a straightforward case. The judge was ready to rule. He was ready to give her everything. He was ready to bang his gavel and seal the injustice forever. Valerie was smiling behind her handkerchief. Gavin was leaning forward in his seat, ready to celebrate. Harrow looked at me. I gave him a single nod. It was time. We do have something to say. Your Honor, Harrow said, standing up slowly. We have no witnesses to call regarding the will. Valerie's smile widened. However, Harrow continued, his voice sharpening like a blade. We do have some physical evidence regarding the plaintiff's testimony, specifically regarding the cremation and the ashes she claims are her husband. Sterling jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. We are here to discuss the will, not the funeral arrangements. It goes to the credibility of the witness, Judge Pendergast said. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Harrow. Harrow turned to me. I reached under the table and pulled out the heavy brass urn. I placed it on the defense table with a dull thud. Mrs. Mercer claimed under oath just now that these are the ashes of Leo Mercer, Harrow said. She claimed she witnessed his death. She claimed she acted out of love. I stood up. I did not need a microphone. My voice was the voice of a drill sergeant, a tunnel builder, a father. Your Honor, I said, ignoring Sterling's sputtering protests. I am not a lawyer, I am a builder. And in my business, before you pour the concrete, you have to check the foundation. I picked up the urn and walked toward the bench. The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge waved him off. I placed the urn in front of the judge. This woman is a liar, I said, pointing back at Valerie, who had gone pale. And I am not just going to tell you why. I am going to show you. The room went deadly quiet. The air pressure seemed to drop. I had taken the beating. I had let them throw their mud. Now it was time to bring the roof down on their heads. Your Honor, I do not need to call a parade of character witnesses to tell you who my son was. I do not need neighbors or co-workers to speculate on his state of mind. The truth is not found in opinions. The truth is found in matter, in physics, in the hard, cold reality of what remains when a life is extinguished. I placed my hand on the brass lid of the urn. It was cool to the touch. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Valerie watched me from the witness stand, her face a mask of polite confusion. She did not know where I was going with this. She thought I was just an old man clinging to a jar of dust for sentimental reasons. She thought I was going to make a speech about how much I missed him. She was wrong. Mrs. Mercer, I said, keeping my voice low and level, you stated that you arranged for this cremation yourself. Is that correct? Yes, Valerie replied, dabbing her eyes again. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. And you used a facility called Paradise Rest. That is correct. Did you verify the identity of the body before it was placed in the retort? Did you look at him one last time to say goodbye? Valerie hesitated for a fraction of a second. She was building the lie in her head, trying to make it sound poignant. I did, she whispered. He looked peaceful. He looked like he was just sleeping. I kissed his forehead, and then they took him away. And you waited there until the process was finished. Yes. I couldn't leave him. I waited for 3 hours until they handed me this urn. I nodded slowly, as if I accepted her answer. I picked up the urn and weighed it in my hands. It feels substantial, doesn't it? It feels like a life. 6 pounds of ash. That is the standard weight for an adult male. It seems the people at Paradise Rest are very precise with their measurements. Valerie sniffed. It feels like the weight of the world to me, Augustus. I turned away from her and walked toward the judge's bench. I placed the urn down on the polished wood right next to the court reporter's machine. Then I walked back to my table and picked up a manila envelope. It was old and worn at the corners. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A into evidence. Sterling stood up. Objection. We haven't seen this document. Harrow handed a copy to Sterling, who snatched it and scanned it quickly. His eyes widened. He looked at Valerie, then back at the paper. He slowly sat down. This is a medical record from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, dated August 14th, 2003, I said. Opening the folder. It details a surgery performed on Leo Mercer after a severe motorcycle accident. My son shattered his right tibia in 3 places. It was a complex fracture that required significant reinforcement to heal. I pulled out the X-ray film and held it up to the courtroom lights. The white bones of my son's leg glowed against the dark background, and there, running straight down the center of the shin bone, was a bright, solid white line. To stabilize the leg, the surgeons inserted an intramedullary rod, I explained. It is a solid metal pin that runs the length of the bone. Specifically, it is made of grade 5 titanium alloy. I lowered the X-ray and looked directly at Valerie. She had stopped crying. Her handkerchief was lowered. Her mouth was slightly open. She was smart enough to know that a trap had just been sprung, but she didn't know how deep the teeth would bite. Titanium is a remarkable metal. I continued pacing in front of the witness stand. It is lightweight. It is strong. And most importantly, for our purposes today, it is incredibly heat-resistant. The melting point of titanium is 3,034 degrees Fahrenheit. I paused to let that number sink in. 3,000 degrees. Now the average cremation chamber operates at a maximum temperature of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. It is hot enough to turn flesh to gas and bone to brittle fragments, but it is not hot enough to melt titanium. Not even close. I turned back to the urn sitting on the judge's bench. So if my son Leo Mercer was truly placed in that chamber, as his devoted wife claims, and if his body was burned until nothing remained but ash, then there is one physical certainty that cannot be debated. That 10-inch solid metal rod would be inside that jar right now. It would be scorched. It would be black. But it would be there. I walked over to the urn. I placed my hand on the lid. Mrs. Mercer, you said you waited 3 hours. You said they handed you this urn. So tell me, did you hear it rattle? Because a metal rod inside a brass jar makes a very distinct sound. Valerie went pale. Her skin turned the color of old parchment. She gripped the railing of the witness stand so hard, her knuckles turned white. She looked at Gavin, but he was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. I don't know what you are talking about, she stammered. Maybe it melted. Maybe the machine was hotter than usual. I shook my head. Physics does not make exceptions for liars, Valerie. But we do not have to guess. We can check. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I request permission to open this urn. If my son is in there, the rod is in there. If the rod is not in there, then the contents of this jar are a fabrication. And if the contents are a fabrication, then the death certificate is a lie, and the will is a fraud. Judge Pendergast looked at Valerie. He looked at the urn. He looked at the X-ray. His face was hard set in lines of grim determination. Open it, Mr. Mercer, the judge ordered. I unscrewed the lid. The sound of metal grinding on metal was the only sound in the room. I tipped the urn over onto the evidence tray that the bailiff had provided. A pile of gray dust and white chunks slid out. It settled into a heap. I reached in with my bare hand. I sifted through the ash. I felt the grit. I felt the jagged edges of bone. But my fingers met no resistance. There was no metal, no rod, no screw. Nothing. I held up my gray-stained hand to the court. Empty, I said. A gasp went through the gallery. The jurors were leaning forward, their eyes wide. But I am not done, Your Honor. I reached for a second document on my table. Since I suspected that my daughter-in-law might be mistaken about the nature of these remains, I took the liberty of having a sample analyzed by Dr. Iris Thorne, a forensic geologist. I held up the lab report. The analysis concludes that the ash in this jar is primarily composed of cellulose, oak wood to be precise, and the bone fragments. They are not human. They are bovine. Cow bone. I turned to Valerie. You didn't just kill him. You replaced him with fireplace ash and soup bones. You looked me in the eye and handed me a pile of garbage and told me it was my son. Valerie stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. That is a lie. That report is fake. You switched the ashes. You are trying to frame me. Sit down, Mrs. Mercer. Judge Pendergast barked, his voice booming like a cannon shot. She didn't sit. She looked wild, desperate. But I had one more blow to deliver, one more truth that would shatter her defense completely. We didn't just test the ash, Valerie. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. We also searched the ocean. I signaled to the bailiff, who opened the side door. 2 police officers walked in carrying a large plastic bin. They set it down on the floor. My dive team found something in the fissure at Black Rock, I said. They found a canvas bag weighted down with chains, and inside that bag they found a man with a titanium rod in his right leg. Valerie screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a primal sound of terror. She covered her mouth with her hands and stumbled back, knocking over the microphone stand. The feedback screeched through the courtroom, amplifying her panic. The judge slammed his gavel down. Bailiff, secure the witness. No one leaves this room. I stood in the center of the chaos, my hand still covered in the gray dust of the fake ashes. I watched her crumble. The mask was gone. The grieving widow was gone. All that was left was a monster exposed to the light. And for the first time since that phone call at 4 a.m., I felt a sense of peace. The trap had worked. The prey was caught. And justice was about to be served cold. Valerie collapsed back into her chair as if her strings had been cut. Her face was no longer pale, it was translucent. She looked at the judge, then at me, and finally at the empty urn on the bench. The pieces of her perfectly constructed lie were falling apart around her, but she wasn't done fighting yet. Panic does strange things to people. It makes them irrational. That is ridiculous, she shrieked, her voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. You are lying. You planted that bag. You paid those divers. It is a conspiracy. You have always hated me, Augustus. You just want to see me destroy myself. Judge Pendergast leaned forward, his face dark with anger. Mrs. Mercer, you are under oath. Do you realize the gravity of what you are suggesting? It is the truth, she cried, pointing a shaking finger at me. The crematorium must have made a mistake. They gave me the wrong ashes. That happens, right? People get mixed up all the time. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? I am just a grieving widow. She was flailing, grabbing at any excuse she could find. Blaming the crematorium was a clever pivot, but it was too little too late. She was trying to turn a murder into a clerical error. Sterling. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. He was flipping through his papers, his face flushed. He knew he was on a sinking ship, and he was looking for a lifeboat. Your Honor, Sterling stammered. If there has been a mix-up with the remains, perhaps we should recess to verify. There will be no recess, I interrupted, my voice cutting through their noise like a knife, because there was no mix-up, and there was no cremation. I turned toward the back of the courtroom. The heavy double doors swung open with a groan that sounded like Judgment Day. 2 men in uniform walked in. They were not local bailiffs. They wore the distinct tan uniforms of the Maui Police Department, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. One of them carried a laptop. The other carried a large evidence box sealed with red tape. The room erupted in whispers. Valerie's eyes went wide. She looked at the door, then at the window as if calculating the jump. The lead officer, a tall Hawaiian man with a stern face, walked past the gallery and stopped in front of the prosecutor's table. He handed a document to the judge. Your Honor, Officer Ka'ana said, we are here to execute a federal arrest warrant for Valerie Mercer and Gavin Reynolds. The charges are first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and tampering with a corpse. Valerie let out a strangled sob. No, you can't do this. Officer Ka'ana turned to face the court. He opened the laptop and connected it to the large screen on the wall. We have recovered the body of Leo Mercer from the Black Rock fissure, he announced. The autopsy confirms the presence of succinylcholine in his system, a paralytic agent. He was alive when he went into the water. He was conscious, but he couldn't move. The screen flickered to life. It showed the underwater footage, the dark blue gloom of the ocean floor, the jagged rocks, and then the canvas bag. Valerie turned away, covering her eyes. But that is not all, Officer Ka'ana continued. We also recovered digital evidence, a GoPro camera found on Mr. Reynolds' boat. It seems they forgot that the cloud backs up everything. He clicked a file. A video began to play. It was shaky, filmed from the deck of a boat at night. The moon was bright on the water. In the video, Gavin's face appeared laughing. He was holding a syringe. Nighty-night, Leo, he said. The camera panned down. Leo was lying on the deck, his eyes wide open, terrified, unable to speak or move. Valerie stepped into the frame. She was wearing a bikini, holding a glass of champagne. She bent down and kissed Leo's forehead. Sorry, babe, she said, her voice clear and chilling. But you are worth more dead than alive. The courtroom gasped in unison. It was a collective sound of horror. Jurors covered their mouths. Sterling dropped his pen. Even the judge looked sick. Valerie stared at the screen, her own face mocking her from the past. The evidence was irrefutable. It was raw evil captured in high definition. That is not me, she whispered weakly. That is deepfake. You made that. Nobody listened to her anymore. The spell was broken. The performance was over. Suddenly there was a commotion in the gallery. Gavin, who had been sitting frozen in terror, made his move. He jumped up from his seat, kicking the bench back with a loud crash. He shoved past a stunned reporter and bolted for the aisle. He was fast. He was young. He thought he could outrun justice. He sprinted toward the exit, his eyes fixed on the freedom beyond the doors. But he had to pass me to get there. I did not stand up. I did not chase him. I simply waited until he was parallel to my table. As he lunged forward, I extended my right leg. It was a simple move, precise. timed to the second. My heavy boot caught his shin. Gavin tripped. His momentum carried him forward, but his feet were gone. He flew through the air, arms flailing like a bird shot out of the sky. He hit the floor hard, face first. The sound of his nose breaking against the marble floor echoed through the silent room. A spray of blood hit the white tile. He groaned, trying to push himself up, but the fight was gone. I looked down at him from my chair. I didn't even uncross my arms. "Going somewhere, Gavin?" I asked, my voice calm and cold. "The show is just getting started." The federal marshals were on him in seconds. They hauled him up, cuffs clicking into place. He was crying now, blood streaming down his face, begging for a deal, begging for mercy. I turned back to Valerie. She was still sitting in the witness stand, shaking uncontrollably. The bailiff moved in behind her. Valerie looked at me one last time. Her eyes were empty. The arrogance, the greed, the beauty, it was all gone. All that was left was fear. "Why," she whispered, "why couldn't you just let it go?" I stood up, slowly buttoning my jacket. I picked up the empty brass urn from the judge's bench. "Because he was my son," I said, "and you made the mistake of thinking I was just an old man." I turned my back on her. I walked toward the exit. The sound of her handcuffs clicking shut behind me was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The truth had risen from the depths, and it had dragged them down to hell. The sound of Gavin being dragged out of the courtroom faded, but the echo of his screams seemed to linger in the heavy air. The federal marshals turned their attention to Valerie. She was no longer the composed widow in the black dress. She was a trapped animal. Her hair had come loose from its severe bun, hanging in ragged strands around her face. Her mascara ran in dark streaks down her cheeks, making her look like a broken doll. When the marshal reached for her wrist, she didn't just pull away, she snapped. "Do not touch me," she shrieked, her voice tearing at her throat. "Get your hands off me. I am Mrs. Leo Mercer. I own this town. You work for me." The marshal didn't blink. He spun her around with practiced efficiency and forced her arms behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of a life ending. Valerie began to thrash. She kicked at the table, sending papers flying. She threw her head back and let out a wail that was not born of sorrow, but of pure, unadulterated rage. "He made me do it," she screamed, looking wildly around the room, trying to find a sympathetic face but finding only disgust. "Leo made me do it. He was going to leave me. He served me the papers the day before we left. He was going to divorce me and leave me with nothing." The courtroom fell silent again, stunned by the sudden confession. Valerie didn't care who was listening anymore. The dam had broken, and the poison was spilling out. He knew about the debts. She spat the words out like venom. He found out about the loans. He told me I was a liability. After 5 years of being his perfect wife, he looked at me and said I was a liability. He was going to cut me off. No alimony, no settlement. He said I broke the prenup. He was going to throw me on the street like garbage. She looked at me, then her eyes burning with hatred. "It is your fault, Augustus. You put those ideas in his head. You told him to protect the money. You told him never to trust me. So I took what was mine. I earned that money. I put up with his boring stories and his obsession with the ocean and his family dinners. I earned every penny. I wasn't going to let him divorce me. I wasn't going to go back to being a nobody." The judge hammered his gavel, but Valerie screamed over him. "I had to do it. He didn't suffer. I gave him the shot. He just went to sleep. It was mercy. I gave him mercy, which is more than he ever gave me." The marshal forced her toward the aisle, but she dug her heels in, sliding across the polished floor. She was hyperventilating now, her chest heaving, her eyes rolling back in her head. The reality of the needle in her arm of the prison cell waiting for her was finally crashing down on her delusions of grandeur. I stood there and watched her unravel. It was pathetic. It was ugly. But it was necessary. I needed to see the monster underneath the makeup. I needed to hear her admit that my son was nothing more to her than a bank account she couldn't access. Augustus stepped out from behind the defendant's table. The marshals paused, seeing the look on my face. They knew this was personal. They knew I had earned a moment. I walked until I was 2 feet away from her. The smell of her expensive perfume was now mixed with the scent of sweat and fear. She looked up at me, panting, her chest heaving against the black dress. "Augustus?" She whimpered, her tone shifting instantly from rage to manipulation. "Augustus, please. You know me. I am not a bad person. I was desperate. He was going to ruin me. I just wanted to survive. Help me. Please. You have the best lawyers. You can fix this. We can say it was self-defense. We can say he attacked me." I looked down at her. I looked at the hands that had held my son's face while she betrayed him. I looked at the eyes that had watched him drown. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My silence was heavier than any shout. "Self-defense," I repeated slowly, tasting the absurdity of the words. "You drugged a man who trusted you. You paralyzed him. You threw him into the ocean bound in chains. That is not survival, Valerie. That is slaughter." "But I am family," she cried, tears streaming down her face again. "I am your daughter-in-law." "No," I said, cold as the grave. "You are the woman who murdered my son, and you did it for money that you were never going to get." She blinked, confusion clouding her panic. "What?" I leaned in closer so only she could hear me. "You said he was going to divorce you. You said you had to act fast to get the inheritance. But you forgot about the ironclad trust. You forgot the document I wrote." I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Even if you had gotten away with it, Valerie. Even if I hadn't come to Hawaii. Even if the ashes had fooled everyone. You would have gotten nothing." She shook her head. "The will. He wrote a new will. The will was void the moment you signed it," I said. "The trust owns everything. The house, the cars, the accounts. And the trust has a slayer clause. If the beneficiary is under investigation for the death of the grantor, the funds are frozen. If they are convicted, the funds are donated to charity." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You killed him for nothing," I whispered. "You threw away your life and his life for a check that would have never cleared. You are not just a murderer, Valerie. You are a fool." The color drained from her face completely. The realization hit her harder than the handcuffs. The futility of her crime. The absolute waste of it all. She had destroyed everything for a prize that didn't exist. The marshal tugged on her arm again. "Let's go." This time she didn't fight. Her legs gave out. She went limp, a dead weight in their arms. They had to drag her out of the courtroom, her feet trailing on the floor, her head hanging down. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at the cameras. And she didn't look back at me. I watched her go. I watched the heavy doors swing shut behind her, sealing her fate. I turned back to the empty courtroom. My lawyer Harrow was packing up his briefcase. The judge had retired to his chambers. The gallery was clearing out. I walked over to the table where the evidence box sat. I looked at the photo of Leo on the screen one last time. "It is done, son," I said softly. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Harrow. "Augustus," he said gently. "The car is waiting." I nodded. I felt tired. A bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the weight of the truth. But as I walked down the aisle leaning on my cane, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't have my son back. Nothing could bring him back. But I had given him the only thing left I could give. I had given him justice. And as I walked out into the bright Chicago afternoon, leaving the shadows of the court behind, I took my first real breath since that phone call at 4 a.m. The air was crisp, the sun was shining, and the woman who had brought darkness into our lives was finally where she belonged, in the dark. The funeral for Leo Mercer was held 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning that was so clear it felt like a silent apology from the sky. We did not hold it at a funeral home. We held it at the private cemetery near Lake Michigan, where his mother was buried. This time there were no fake tears and no live stream cameras. There were no strangers seeking 15 minutes of fame. The crowd was small but solid. Men and women he had served with during his brief tour in the Marines stood in formation, their dress blues sharp against the green grass. Members of his triathlon club stood shoulder to shoulder, their heads bowed in genuine respect. I stood at the head of the grave. The casket was closed, draped in the American flag. It was a heavy mahogany coffin, not a brass jar of lies. Inside rested the body of my son, recovered from the deep, and finally at peace. The chaplain spoke of duty and honor, but I wasn't really listening to the words. I was listening to the wind in the trees and the distant sound of the waves. I was remembering the boy who used to run into the water fearlessly, who trusted everyone, and who loved with a heart too big for his own good. When the bugler began to play taps, the mournful notes drifted over the hills, piercing the silence. I watched as the honor guard folded the flag with precise, practiced movements. 13 folds, each one a symbol. They handed the tight triangle to me. "On behalf of a grateful nation, sir," the young corporal said, his eyes meeting mine. I took the flag. It felt heavy in my hands, heavier than the urn had been, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of truth, the weight of a life that mattered. After the ceremony, I did not host a reception at the big house in Lincoln Park. That house was already on the market, listed as is. I never wanted to step foot in it again. Instead, I invited everyone to the small community center near the lake where Leo used to volunteer teaching kids to swim. I stood on the small stage looking out at the faces of people who had truly loved him. I adjusted the microphone. I did not have a prepared speech. I spoke from the scar tissue on my heart. Leo was a man who believed in saving people. I said, my voice steady. He saved me more times than he knew just by being my son. He tried to save Valerie too, but some people do not want to be saved. They only want to take. I paused, looking down at the legal documents in my hand. Valerie wanted $5 million. She killed for it. She destroyed her life for it. But money is just paper. It has no soul. It only has the value we give it. And today I am giving it a new value. I held up the check. It was a cashier's check for the entire liquidated amount of the Ironclad Trust. $5,200,000. I am donating every cent of Leo's estate, I announced. Half will go to the National Sea Rescue Foundation to buy new equipment and train divers so that no family has to wait for the ocean to give back their loved ones. And the other half will go to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, because Leo always said that kids should be busy playing, not fighting for their lives. There was a moment of silence, then applause broke out. It wasn't polite applause. It was loud and fierce. People were crying not for the loss, but for the legacy. I handed the check to the director of the foundation, who was standing in the front row. He took it with shaking hands. I kept nothing. I didn't need the money. I had my tunnels. I had my memories. And I had my dignity. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, I walked out to the parking lot. I didn't walk to my luxury SUV. I walked to a battered blue Ford pickup truck. It was Leo's old truck, the one he used for hauling his gear, the one Valerie had hated because it was too blue-collar. Sitting in the passenger seat, head resting on the open window frame, was Buster, Leo's golden retriever. He was old now, his muzzle gray, but his tail thumped against the seat when he saw me. He had been staying at a kennel while Valerie played the widow, but I had sprung him out this morning. I opened the door and climbed into the driver's seat. The cab smelled of old leather and surf wax. It smelled like my son. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a rough, honest roar. I reached over and scratched Buster behind the ears. "Ready to go, buddy?" I asked. He barked once, a short, happy sound. I put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the road. I didn't look back at the cemetery. I didn't look back at the city. I drove west, chasing the dying light. I was 70 years old. I had buried my wife and now my son. I was alone in the traditional sense. But as I drove with the wind in my face and a loyal dog by my side, I didn't feel lonely. I felt a strange sense of completion. I had done my job. I had protected him when he was alive, and I had avenged him when he was dead. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the dark. Because I knew that no matter how deep the water gets, the truth will always float to the surface. And as long as I had breath in my body, I would be there to make sure it did. 6 months after the funeral, I found myself walking through the heavy steel doors of the Federal Correctional Institution in Waseca, Minnesota. The air inside smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee, a smell that sticks to your clothes and your soul. I did not have to come here. My lawyer Harrow told me I was crazy to reopen old wounds. But I am a man who finishes the job. I needed to see the structural integrity of the cage I had built. I sat on the cold metal stool in the visitation room. On the other side of the reinforced glass, Valerie was led in. She looked 20 years older. The blonde hair that she used to spend hundreds of dollars highlighting was now dull and showing gray roots. Her face was gaunt, stripped of the expensive creams and treatments she used to charge to my son's credit cards. She sat down and picked up the receiver. Her hands were shaking. "You look well." "Augustus," she said, her voice raspy and thin. "I am surviving, Valerie," I said. "I heard you sold the house," she whispered. "My mother told me. She said a young couple bought it." "They did. An architect and a teacher. They are expecting a baby in the fall. They are turning Leo's old room into a nursery. They are going to fill that house with life, not debt." Valerie flinched as if I had slapped her. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no pity. I had saved my pity for the son she murdered. "Why are you here, Augustus?" "To gloat. To see me in this jumpsuit." "No, I came to tell you that the probate is officially closed. The judge signed the final order yesterday. Gavin took a plea deal. He got 25 years for testifying against you. He told them everything, Valerie. How you planned it. How you bought the drugs. How you practiced the crying." She slammed her hand against the glass. "He is a liar. He is a coward. He is a coward, yes. But he is a coward who will see the outside world again in 2 decades. You got life without parole, Valerie. Special circumstances. Premeditated murder for financial gain. You are going to die in this concrete box." She began to weep openly, now ugly sobbing that echoed in the small booth. "I just wanted a better life," she choked out. "I just wanted to be free." "You had a good life," I said, leaning closer to the glass. "You had a husband who adored you. You had a home. You had family. But you were greedy. You wanted the fruit, but you didn't want to water the tree. And now you have exactly what you earned. Nothing." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for the guard to take her away. I stood up and buttoned my coat. I walked out of that prison, and for the first time the ghost of my son wasn't walking behind me. He was walking beside me. We left her there, in the silence she had created. 2 weeks later, I was back in Maui. But this time I wasn't there to hunt. I was there to build. I stood on the pier at Mailea Harbor, the trade winds blowing through my white hair. Next to me stood Kai, the lead diver who had found my son. Behind us bobbed a brand-new 40-foot rescue vessel. It was painted a brilliant white with a deep blue stripe. On the bow in bold black letters was the name, the Leo. "It is beautiful," Mr. Mercer, Kai said, running a hand along the railing. Twin diesel engines, side scan, sonar, hyperbaric chamber on board. This boat is a beast. It needs to be, I said. The ocean is unforgiving. This boat is going to change everything, Kai continued. Just yesterday we got a call about a kayaker swept out by the trade winds. In the old boat, it would have taken us an hour to reach him. With the Leo, we got there in 20 minutes. He was dehydrated and scared, but he is alive. He is going home to his family tonight because of you. But the real test came 3 days later. I was down at the harbor checking the fuel lines when the radio crackled to life. Mayday. A tourist catamaran had capsized near Molokini Crater. 12 people in the water. Kai was already running toward the boat. "Get on, Gus," he shouted over the roar of the engines. "I need a spotter." I didn't hesitate. I threw my cane on the dock and jumped aboard my old marine instincts, overriding the ache in my joints. We tore across the waves, the Leo cutting a white path of foam through the deep blue. When we arrived, it was chaos. Debris everywhere. People screaming, clinging to coolers and cushions. "Starboard side!" I yelled, pointing to a small shape drifting away from the group. It was a young girl no older than 7, struggling to keep her head above the swells. Kai swung the boat around with surgical precision. I leaned over the gunwale, the spray stinging my eyes. I reached out my arm, straining my hand, searching. I grabbed her wrist just as she slipped under. I pulled. I pulled with the strength of a father who couldn't save his own son. I pulled with the rage of a man who had lost everything. I hauled her onto the deck, gasping and coughing water. She was shivering, terrified. I wrapped a thermal blanket around her and held her tight. She looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I looked at her, then at the ocean that had taken Leo. I realized then that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about balancing the scales. For the one life Valerie took, the Leo would save 100. That was the math of my revenge. That was the calculus of a father's love. I looked at the boat. I looked at the horizon, where the deep blue water met the sky. I thought about the $32 million my father had left behind in another story I had heard once about a man named Vance. Money is just paper until you give it a purpose. I didn't save my son Kai. I said, my voice thick with emotion. I couldn't save him. Kai put a hand on my shoulder. "No, sir. But you are saving the next one, and the one after that. That is a legacy. That is immortality." We christened the boat with a bottle of champagne, not the expensive Dom Perignon that Valerie drank while plotting murder, but a simple bottle of sparkling cider. I smashed it against the hull, and the foam ran down the side like tears of joy. That evening, I sat on the lanai of a small rented cottage overlooking the bay. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I lit a cigar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, one for me, and one that I placed on the railing for Leo. I took out the pocket watch I had taken back from Gavin. I wound it carefully. Click, click, click. The sound was steady. It was the sound of a heart beating. I had stripped the gold from the lies. I had burned the deceit. I had crushed the greed. And in the end, I found something I didn't expect to find in the wreckage. I found myself. I am Augustus Mercer. I am a father. I am a builder. And I am still standing. Rebuilding a life is not so different from digging a tunnel through unstable earth. You hit pockets of bad air. You hit rock so hard it shatters your tools. Sometimes the roof caves in and leaves you in the dark, choking on the dust of your own mistakes. A weaker man would turn back. He would say the mountain is too heavy. But I did not turn back. I reinforced the walls with the steel of my resolve. I pumped in the fresh air of truth. And I kept digging inch by bloody inch until I broke through to the other side. The light here is different. It is sharper. but it is clean. The world is full of monsters wearing smiling masks, my friends. They hide in our homes, they sleep in our beds, and they eat at our tables. But remember this: the truth is a relentless hunter. It does not sleep, it does not tire, and eventually it catches everyone. So trust your gut, protect your family, and never ever underestimate the resolve of a man who has nothing left to lose but his honor. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep your eyes on the tide. We learn from this story that greed can make people blind to the true value of life, but it can never hide the truth forever. Trust is a precious gift that should be given carefully, and when broken, it must be met not with vengeance but with justice. We also learn that a legacy isn't built on what you leave in a bank account, but on the actions you take to honor those you love. If you enjoyed this story and believe that justice always finds a way, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and resilience. Let me know in the comments if you would have done what Augustus did. See you in the next story.